Real Talk 49. Hello friends, welcome back to Culips. You're listening to a Real Talk. Real Talk is the series where we teach you the English expressions that you need to know for real world situations. And today, we're going to teach you how to make dinner reservations at a restaurant. Now, I just said, we're going to teach you. We're going to teach you. That means I'm joined by somebody else, so I should introduce my co-host for this episode. It's Cassie. Hey there, Cassie. How's it going? I'm doing great, Andrew. Thanks. Perfect, Cassie. We also wanted to give a shout out to one of our listeners from Belarus, Victoria, who recently left us a 5-star rating and a nice review on Apple Podcasts. And Victoria left us such a nice message. Cassie, would you mind reading it for us all? Would you mind reading it for us all? Sure. So Victoria says, Hi there, I'm from Belarus, and I came across this podcast a few weeks ago. I really enjoy listening to it. Since there are a huge number of different topics covered. I usually do it on my way to work or home. It's quite easy to understand, and it really helps to enrich the vocabulary and listening skills. I also like hearing your pleasant voices. Thanks for doing a great job. Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, Victoria, for that nice review. And listeners, if you'd like to hear yourself at the start of an upcoming Culips episode, we would love to give you a shout out. So to do that, just leave us a 5-star rating and a nice review on Apple Podcasts or where you listen to your podcasts, and we will try to mention you in an upcoming episode. All right, so let's get into our episode for today. Cassie, could you tell us what exactly we're going to cover? Yeah, so we're going to be listening to a conversation between a restaurant host and a person who wants to dine at that restaurant. And we're going to be learning key phrases and questions that you might come across. We are going to be learning key phrases and questions that you might come across. If you were to make a reservation. Exactly. So if anyone ever has to make a reservation for a restaurant in English, if anyone ever has to make a reservation for a restaurant in English in the future, this is going to be the perfect episode for you. And this is something that I think a lot of our listeners will maybe have to do at some point in their lives if they are travel to an English speaking country or just travel in general to a place where they don't speak the local language and the kind of international language that is used is English. Exactly. So if anyone ever has to make a reservation for a restaurant, if you ever has to make a reservation for a restaurant in English in the future, this is going to be the perfect episode for you. And this is something that I think a lot of our Exactly. So if anyone ever has to make a reservation for a restaurant in English in the future, this is going to be the perfect episode for you. And this is something that I think a lot of our listeners will maybe have to do at some point in their lives if they travel to an English speaking country or just travel in general to a place where they don't speak the local language, and the kind of international language that is used is English. This is something that I think 이런 것 같다. I think this is something that I think a lot of 그런 것 같아. This is something that I think. This is something that I think. This is something that I think. This is something that I think a lot of our listeners will maybe have to do at some point in the future in their lives if they travel to an English-speaking countries. If they travel to an English-speaking country, or just travel in general to a place where they don't speak the local language, and the kind of international language that is used is English. This is something that I think a lot of our listeners will maybe have to do at some point in their lives. If they travel to an English-speaking country, or just travel in general a place where they don't speak the local language, and the kind of international language that is used is English. First up, we'll listen to a conversation, and then we'll break it down and explain all of the key expressions that you listeners need to know. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Let's do it. This is the mystique. Oh, hello. I'd like to make a reservation for two. Oh, hello. I'd like to make a reservation for 2 this Saturday. All right. And what time will you be joining us this evening? I prefer something between 7:30 and 8, if that's available. Oh, let me see. We only have outside seating on the deck. We only have outside seating on the deck available at the time. Will that work for you? Let me see. We only have outside seating on the deck available. We only have outside seating on the deck available at the time. Will that work for you? Sure, yeah, that will be fine. Okay, then I will put you down as a party of 2 for 7:30, correct? Okay, I will put you down as a party of 2 for 7:30, correct? Perfect. And under whose name are you making the reservation? McGrady. Okay, thank you, Mr. McGrady. We'll see you on Saturday night. All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, listeners. So we just heard a conversation between the host at the restaurant who takes reservations and does customer service and that kind of thing at that restaurant. And a customer who would like to visit the restaurant on Saturday evening. That customer was making a reservation. So Cassie, why don't we go through this conversation now and highlight some of the important language that was used in order to successfully make that reservation. Yeah, I think we should definitely start with the very first expression, the very first thing. I think we should definitely start with the very first thing. The person making the reservation said, which was, I'd like to make a reservation for 2 this Saturday. The person 사람이 말했다. Okay. The person making the reservation said, which was, I'd like to make a reservation for 2 this Saturday. I'd like to make a reservation for 2 this Saturday. Exactly. So there's 2 things in this sentence that you might that you may need to change depending on your situation, right? There's 2 expressions in this sentence that you need to change, that you may need to change depending on your situation. Depending on your situation. There's two things. There's two things in this sentence that you may need to change depending on your situation, right? When we say for 2, it means for 2 people. But if you had maybe a larger family or a larger get together, and you had more people, then you would need to change that number, of course, right? I'd like to make a reservation for 4. I'd like to make a reservation for 6. Like that. Exactly. And then the second part you might want to change is the day. So the second part you might want to change is the day. So in this example, it was a reservation for 2 this Saturday. But maybe you would have it on a Sunday or a Friday or a Wednesday. And it might even be next week. So you might not say this Saturday, meaning the next week meaning the week that you are on currently, but it could be for the following week, for the next week. So I'd like to make a reservation for 3 next Wednesday, something like that. Exactly. I mean, some really fancy restaurant even require reservations, like a month in advance, right, Andrew? Yeah, absolutely. So you might have to say your ideal time, but if that time is booked and busy, then they might say, oh, sorry, we are busy at that time. The earliest we could squeeze you in would be next month. The earliest we could squeeze you in would be the next month. The earliest we could squeeze you in would be next month, something like that. So if they are busy, they would suggest the soonest available time that you could visit, and you would just have to go from there. Exactly. And what's our next expression? Well, the customer says when he would like to make the reservation and how many people will be in the party. Customer says when he would like to make the reservation and how many people will be in the party. We call this a party. We call this a party. The people who will be visiting the restaurant are a party. So he says it's a party of two. They want to visit on Saturday. And then the host asks, what time? What time in the evening will you be joining us? So what time will you be joining us that evening? And this is just a question that everyone should expect to be asked. This is just a question that everyone should expect to be asked. Everyone should expect to be asked. This is just a question that everyone should expect to be asked because it is important for the restaurant to know what time you will visit so that they can get prepared for you. Should expect to be asked. So you would just choose a choose a ballpark time that you'd like. Choose a ballpark time that you'd like. In this case, it was between 7:30 and 8. You could say you wanted earlier time, like 5 o'clock, or later 9 o'clock. It all depends on what you need. And Cassie, you just used an interesting expression there, a ballpark. So a ballpark time or ballpark figure is just an estimation. Is just an estimation, right? It's not like, oh, I will be at the restaurant exactly at 7:30 p.m. It's more like a window, a gap of time, like between 7:30 and 8. And that is usually how we will make a reservation. Exactly. So following that, host checks her computer and sees that actually the restaurant is full. So following that, the host checks her computer and sees that actually the restaurant is full, but they do have some space outside on the deck. So they have outside sitting on the deck. Some restaurants will also call this area the patio. So you might hear deck, you might hear patio, both are common. You might hear deck, you might hear patio. Both are common. And that just means sitting outside of the restaurant these days, because of COVID in North America, many restaurants have actually switched the layout of the restaurants to more of an outdoor dining area. So I think it's probably pretty common these days that many people are eating on decks and patios. So yeah, this is something that is kind of a new trend. This is something that is kind of a new trend but very popular these days. Yeah, that's right. This is something that is kind of a new trend but very popular these days. Yeah, that's right. I think especially in the summertime, this is popular everywhere, anywhere. This is popular anywhere, COVID or no COVID. Yeah, I love it. Personally, I like eating outside. Patios are awesome in my opinion. And then the customer confirms, yeah, that's okay. I'd like to sit on the patio. No problem. So the host responds by saying, I will put you down as a party of 2 for 7:30, correct? I will put you down as a party of 2 for 7:30. And this is just a way to confirm. This is just a way to confirm. This is just a way to confirm that she has the information correct. Cassie, we talked about this party of 2, right? Could you just remind us one more time what this means, party of 2? Yeah, so your party isn't, like a fiesta, dancing, and food kind of party. This kind of party is how many members are eating together in your group. So a party of 2 would be 2 people dining together. All right. And then the last question, the last important piece of information that the host needs is the customer's name. So she asked, under whose name are you making the reservation? Under whose name are you making the reservation? And the customer responds, McGrady. And the host knows that this is the last name. So Cassie, usually when you get asked this question, usually when you get asked this question, when you get asked this question, would you respond with your first name or your last name or both? How would you answer this question? This is really funny. I've never made many reservations, but the few times I have, it would always be my last name. Always your last name. Yeah, I might give my first name or my last name in this situation, but I don't think we would give just our first names, right? Somebody said, under whose name are you making this reservation? Oh, Cassie or Andrew. Especially Andrew, my name is really, really common. It's one of the top names for boys. It's one of the top names for boys. It's one of the top names for boys in my generation. I think it's the fourth most popular boy's name. It's the fourth most population. 네 번째로 가장 유명한. 그대로네. It's the first most popular boy's name from the 1980s when I was born. It's the fourth most popular. 네 번째로 가장. It's the fourth most popular. It's the fourth most popular boy's name from the 1980s. It's the fourth most popular boy's name from the 1980s. From the 1980s. It's the fourth most popular boy's name from the 1980s when I was born. So if I say Andrew, it's too common. I need to say my first name and my last name, or just my last name, just to make sure I don't get confused with any other potential customers. Yeah, this might be different. This might be different in other countries. I'm curious to hear what listeners might have to say. Because in countries like Korea, where we live, or maybe even India, or maybe China too, like there's a few names that are really, 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 really popular. So if you just give your last name on a reservation, 10 people might have the same last name making a reservation. Yeah. If you're like from Asia, for example, Asia. Yeah, if you're like from Asia, for example, maybe from China or Korea, and your family name was Lee, and you just said Lee, it might be too common, right? There might be potential other customers that have that same family name, so you might have to leave your full name just to be safe. Yes, that's not as much of an issue in Western countries like Canada or the US. So Andrew, we actually have a part two. We actually have a part two to this conversation, correct? Yeah, that's correct. So in part two, we're gonna hear a follow-up where the customer calls the restaurant again, calls the mistake, and just confirms his reservation. So let's listen to part two of this conversation now. This is the mistake. Hello, I'm just calling to confirm my reservation for tomorrow night. What's the name under the reservation? 이름이 뭔가요? Under the reservation. What's the name under the reservation? Under whose name did you make a reservation? What's the name under the reservation? McGrady. Yes, we have you here as a party of 2, 7:30 on the patio. That's correct? Yeah, that's right. And I know it's last minute, but would it be possible to push our reservation up just a bit to like 6:30? Would it be possible to push our reservation up? Would it be possible to push our reservation up? Would it be possible to push our reservation up to like 6:30? Would it be possible to push our reservation up just a bit to like 6:30? Just a bit? I think we can squeeze you in then, but it will have to be a high top near the bar. Is that all right with you? Yeah, sure, that's fine. Thanks again for fitting us in earlier. No problem, sir. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Okay, like we said, this is a following up conversation. It's sometimes customary for people to call back the night before just to make sure their reservation is on the books. You don't want to show up and then find out your reservation was magically erased or something. So the person calls back and he makes his first expression, which is, I'm calling to confirm my reservation for tomorrow night. I'm calling to confirm my reservation for tomorrow night. I'm calling to confirm my reservation for tomorrow night. Exactly. So if we think about it a bit, this customer actually doesn't want to confirm his reservation. He wants to change his reservation. But he's kind of breaking the ice. And just making sure first that the reservation was made and that there were no errors, and that was actually written in the reservation book. As you mentioned, Cassie, so he confirms first by saying, "Hello, I'm calling to confirm my reservation for tomorrow night." And then the host and the customer confirm the reservation, everything's okay. And then he asks the question that he originally called for, right? Originally. He says, "Would it be possible to push our reservation up to 6:30? Push it up, push it back. Would it be possible to do blah blah blah?" It's just a really polite way to ask a question. It's a really a polite way to ask a question. So would it be possible to push our reservation up to 6:30? Push up is the phrasal verb, and this is a phrasal verb that can be separated. You can put the object of the sentence in between push and up. So push what? Push our reservation up to 6:30, meaning to move it on hour earlier in the day. An hour earlier. 1시간 일찍. Meaning to move it an hour earlier in the day. Yeah, the opposite of pushback. 반대말이다. 저게 반대말이다. Opposite. The opposite of pushback. Opposite. The opposite of a pushback. Right, pushback would be if you wanted to show up maybe at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, right? Then you could say, "Could we push our reservation back?" But if you want to change it to earlier, then you could say, "Could we push our reservation up?" Exactly. And there's a lot of requests that you can make that aren't in this example conversation, such as, "Would it be possible to get a window seat?" 창가 쪽 자리에 앉을 수 있을까요? Would it be possible to get a window seat? Get a window seat? Would it be possible to get a window seat? Or would it be possible to get a booth? Would it be possible to have a birthday song for my grandmother? It's her birthday tomorrow, something like that. Would it be possible to add an extra person to our reservation? Could we change it from 2 people to 3 people, or 2 people to 4 people? Something like that. So yeah, you're right. You can use this kind of question pattern to ask about many different kinds of changes. You can use this kind of question pattern to ask about many different kind of changes. Would it be possible to? Good. So after he asked that question, the host says a really cool phrase. "I think we can squeeze you in. I think we can squeeze you in." Andrew, what does squeeze you in mean? Yeah, so if you squeeze somebody in, it means that you make space available for them even though they are very busy, right? So make space available for them even though you are very busy. So the restaurant, we can imagine at this time is very busy. There aren't too many extra tables available, but the host will make a special accommodation, and they will be able to welcome them for dinner at the time. So squeeze in just means fit into a very busy schedule or a very busy situation. And in this case, they had to switch where they were sitting to, right? Instead of being on the patio, they are switching to a high top near the bar, which are usually just like small tables that are high off the ground, where only about 2 people can sit at usually. Yeah, so it's more like bar sitting instead of regular dining sitting, so maybe not as comfortable. But I guess the restaurant is too busy at the time, so that's the only table available. So the customer agrees, yeah, no problem. That will do. That's fine. And then he says, thanks for feeding us in. And that just means thanks for making a special accommodation for us even though the restaurant is very busy. Thanks for making room for us in this busy situation. That is fitting us in this context. Okay, so we're almost at the end of today's episode, but before we go, let's summarize what we've covered. Alright, so today we learned about how to make dinner reservations over the phone at the restaurant using English. Over the phone. We learned how to make a reservation and common questions that may come up when making a reservation over the phone, such as, I'd like to make a reservation for blank people tonight. Yeah, I'd like to make a reservation for 2 tonight. Or we also learned, okay, what time will you be joining us that evening? We also learned expressions such as party, the number of people who are dining together, and sitting, such as outdoor seating, patio seating, or high top seating. And we learned useful expressions for confirming an existing reservation, such as I'm calling to confirm my reservation for tomorrow night. And finally, we learned ways to modify an already existing reservation. For example, would it be possible to push up my reservation to so-and-so time to 6:30? That's all for now. Talk to you next time.